Hello, everybody. It's Liam. This is the beginning of our Christopher Nolan arc, which is an interesting topic to be discussing while we're old quarantined as the world burns, which is a big theme of these films. Our first episode on Batman Begins, we recorded a while ago, back when you could still travel and George was here in California. And our Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises episodes will probably talk a little bit more about the parallels between this moment and the films, especially Dark Knight Rises when we get there. So we hope you'll stick around for this arc, with its kind of crazy parallels to what's happening in our culture. If you haven't yet, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Tell a friend. Find us on Instagram, Oeuvre Busters, Twitter, Oeuvre Busters. Send us some questions. We got a question from a listener last month, and we did a bonus episode about it, and we're going to do a bonus episode later this month about another question. So we're more than happy to engage with whatever you guys are thinking about too. We hope you enjoy this episode. Bye-bye. I'm Liam Billingham.
Oh, you have to start like that. I'm George Fragopoulos.
And this
is... If you're going to do
Swear
it...
to me.
Swear to me.
Oeuvre Busters.
Ooh,
yeah! Boom, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum, bum. Do you ever notice that Christian Bale's face looks fat in this bat suit sometimes?
It looks a little pudgy. I think it's the mask. It kind of like pudges him out. It's the only ounce of fat on his body in this film.
Which film?
He has 3.5% body fat, and it's all
In
surrounding
his
in his dick? Yeah, of course.
Okay, so to be clear, George and I have been together for the past 5 days in Los Angeles.
Things are going to get really immature.
Recording episodes and made a lot of ridiculous jokes. Most of them are about dicks.
Can I put this travel on my tax expenses for business expenses?
Sure. Oh, we should actually calculate that for this year.
Yeah, it'd be like $125, and that's mainly like ordering in.
Yeah,
snacks
for sure.
So today we're discussing
Batman Begins.
Continuing our deep dive, of course, into the
Batman mythos.
I was going to say oeuvre, but we're not mythos busters.
You just keep breathing into the mic as hard as possible because it's really doing good stuff for me.
I swear to
me. With Batman Begins, written by David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan.
I believe so. Maybe I should look at it on my phone.
Directed by Christopher Nolan.
The auteur, Christopher Nolan.
This is his third feature film.
Whoa.
He did...
Memento?
Fourth feature film.
Was Memento the first one?
Following Memento. Then he got hired to do Insomnia, the remake of the Norwegian film. The remake was with Al Pacino, which is one of Al Pacino's last great performances.
I can't go to sleep. I mean, that's what the film's about.
Oh, I'm a killer. I'm a killer.
Having trouble sleeping?
Oh, I can't sleep. Oh. Wait, I'm confused. And the
thing is, I got a great big bed, and I'm all up in it, but I can't go to sleep.
My 2-year-old daughter is trying to fall asleep in the next room. And then after the Insomnia, they handed him the reins to the Batman franchise, and this was the gritty reboot.
This is kind of a sea change in the Batman mythology.
It's actually kind of a sea change in superhero movies. For good, for bad, it's hard to say, but I think for bad.
A little bit of both.
Who's in this movie?
This film stars, of course, as the already aforementioned Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne / Batman, Katie Holmes as his love interest, Rachel Dawes,
and rising DA in Gotham,
Cillian Murphy. Mm-hmm. Oh wait, we should also say this. So the Rachel Dawes character is played by Maggie Gyllenhaal in the
Dark Knight, and yeah.
Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow.
Dr. Jonathan Crane / Scarecrow. Get your mythology right.
Michael Caine. That was a terrible
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine.
I won't bury another Wayne. I won't do it.
Alfred Pennyworth.
You can borrow the rose if you like.
Liam Neeson as Henri.
Henri
Ducard / Ra's al Ghul. Who we'll also talk about. Obviously, interesting character. Gary Oldman.
We're probably going to talk about all the characters because this is a podcast about movies.
As Commissioner Gordon.
Sergeant Gordon.
And
he only becomes commissioner at the end of the film.
And Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. And Rutger Hauer as... I'm not exactly sure what his name
is.
Big
baddie. Big
corporate
Big
baddie.
Enterprises baddie. Rutger Hauer as Michael Bloomberg, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want to give a quick synopsis of... I'm rich. Can you give a quick synopsis of this film?
So Batman Begins is a Batman origin story.
Yes.
And it begins with Bruce Wayne Batman.
Stop
We're
doing
not
that.
exactly
You
sure
gotta stop doing
where.
that with the mic because just keep it.
Yeah, but then I'm breathing.
Yeah, but it's fine. You're
Are
just
we
you're
gonna
doing
keep this in?
you're doing this. You're going like and then the
Are
the beginning of the sentence.
Are we gonna keep this?
Meaning to talk. Yeah, we're keeping it in.
Okay,
Just
good.
Speak with
All
the
right,
normal.
all right.
Ugh,
Keep
God.
that stuff in about Bale's fatty
Dick.
cock too. Yeah.
So gross.
Batman begins with Batman in
Bhutan.
Bhutan, training to be.
Well, no, he's in jail.
He's in jail.
And he
yeah.
beats up some Asian guys.
We should talk about
Should
this.
talk about that.
So basically, it's an origin story, and the first 40 minutes or so are about him training to become and to develop kind of the skills needed to become Batman. And you get flashbacks,
And
obviously,
it's
of the guilt.
definitely a Christopher Nolan movie and how it flashes forward. Flashes forward and flashes back.
Yeah, there's some flashbacks, obviously, that we get like the Batman origin story again in terms of his parents getting murked in front of him. Meanwhile, in Gotham City, Cillian Murphy, unbeknownst to us, is working for Henri Ducard / Ra's al Ghul to contaminate the water city supply and to
destroy the city of Gotham.
And to destroy the city of Gotham, yeah. And Liam Neeson's character doesn't come back until the very end. And we finally find out, obviously, that Ra's al Ghul is Henri Ducard.
It's worth noting that this film, it's clear, especially with Dark Knight, but I'm sure he was thinking about it with this, that Christopher Nolan was going in a different direction. Gone are the, well, I won't say it's not a cartoon, but gone are some of the more cartoony flourishes or comic booky flourishes that define the last film. And this is more of like I would say this is more of an epic. One of the things I love about these movies is that they are as much about Gotham as a city as they are about Batman, which I think the early Batman and Batman Returns, Tim Burton's films did really well, but Batman Forever and Batman and Robin couldn't give a fuck about stuff like that, and this film is a nice return to form. Christopher Nolan was, heavily influenced by Heat in the making of particularly The Dark Knight, but I'm sure that this film played into that a little bit, and there's like a larger political, it's almost like, I know this is a cliche comparison, but like it's almost like he wanted to do a Wire but with superheroes with these movies a little bit, like kind of a ground level look into this world.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I'm not totally sure about that, but
if you know what I'm going for, there's an attempt at something like larger.
I do agree with you. It's epic, certainly.
Right.
I just don't know if comparing it to The Wire in the sense of, let's say,
it's tired and cliche.
Well,
sorry, everybody.
No, I just mean in the sense of like, is this film interested in structures of power like The Wire is? And I would say it's not.
Oh, I think it can. In some ways it is. In some ways it isn't. Do you remember when you saw this? Don't roll your fucking eyes at me. Do you remember when you saw this movie?
Actually, I don't. I know I saw it in the theater, but I don't remember seeing it.
I went midnight the day it opened.
And
I fell asleep. I was so tired, but I thought it was great. And I've seen this movie probably 10 times.
I think this is only the third time I've seen it.
Oh, really? Yeah, I was really excited. I remember seeing the trailer for this the summer before I went to see Signs, the Mel Gibson movie.
Whoa.
And I don't know if anybody recalls this. Maybe we should talk about...
We said the date 2005 for this, right?
Yeah, 2005. We should talk about a bonus. But when the trailer for this movie came out, it was really unclear for like the entire trailer what it was until the very, very end when Bruce Wayne, when you see the bats and the bats kind of take off and it becomes the bat logo. You didn't know it was and that you really didn't know it was a superhero movie. And that is like kind of a big deal because I really do think that rewatching this film last night, it had a huge influence on the culture and like how superheroes were taken. These movies, the Dark Knight trilogy, which they sort of retconned and turned into the Dark Knight label. But like this movie definitely had a huge impact on how we think about and perceive superhero movies and kind of big budget movies. It's almost 15 years old now and it shows, but yeah. What'd you think of it?
Oh, I really enjoyed it.
You enjoyed rewatching it?
And it's funny because our friend
Nicole Solomon
left us a voicemail detailing, which I almost entirely agree with, this film's shitty politics. And this film does have shitty politics.
Yeah, she's not a big fan of the movie.
But I was thoroughly entertained. And again, it's been a very long time since I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I thought, holy shit, this film is like really it's well done. It's incredibly meticulously crafted.
Yes.
And the control that like Nolan has over this material, it shows. Like he knows exactly what he's doing. And I think it does say a lot of interesting things about trauma and fear.
Way to just say everything that you were going to say about
I didn't say, we didn't talk about the
that.
racism.
I love this movie. And I also agree with nearly everything Nicole says in the voicemail that we're going to play. So Nicole is a filmmaker and business partner of Sean Mannion, who is featured on our
Superman episode.
They have They have a film production company called 4 Mile Circus, and they do a whole bunch of stuff. And Nicole specifically tweeted at us after Sean's Superman episode to say, have me on to talk about Batman Begins so I can talk about how it sucks, you cowards. So let's go live to Nicole right now talking about live. Let's go not live. Let's actually let's go asynchronously to Nicole talking about Batman Begins.
Hi, this is Nicole, and last night I rewatched Batman Begins with my husband, Sean, and it was the first time either of us had seen it since around when it first came out. And we both kind of thought it sucked then, and I think both thought it still kind of sucks and is super overrated. So for starters, the whole first part of the movie, our hero, he's just the worst. He's a one percenter who gets himself into prison in Bhutan so he can beat up throngs of nameless Asian men, and then get discovered by the one other white guy around who for some reason is also the best ninja around, which leads us into the white people do it better training sequence in which Liam Neeson teaches Christian Bale how to ninja, surrounded by nameless Asian men for them to both beat to a pulp. The visuals here are not great, and the whole concept is pretty racist and orientalist, and back in Gotham, things aren't much better. We've got dead-eyed Katie Holmes giving a performance that is beneath her. I'm glad she escaped Scientology. She can't sell her character, which should be a good one, but doesn't work. Has no chemistry with Bale. And I'm sorry his benevolent billionaire Thomas Wayne got murdered in front of his kid, but he's a dickhead, and his role in the moral and economic landscape of the film is reactionary garbage. The dialogue throughout is terrible. Cillian Murphy is amazing and the best thing in the film, and he is criminally underused. The League of Shadows and their politics are both incoherent and red scary, and the Gotham of the gas strike era, where the fuck it's supposed to be, looks silly with the graffiti on the opera house and whatnot. The film kind of raises questions, both moral and ethical, about Bruce Wayne's behavior, but it doesn't really explore them. It more just juxtaposes him with Liam Neeson to make it clear how Wayne has the moral high ground because he doesn't murder people, he just lets them die. And my recollection is that the next two films do a slightly better job on this count, but there's just not much here to chew on. I get why people are happy to get an origin story with some psychological depth for the protagonist, but the politics are bad, and every scene that doesn't have Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, or Cillian Murphy, or a big action sequence in it drags and gets kind of boring. And I guess there's no women, also, now that Bruce Wayne's mom is dead, other than Rachel Dawes and those party girls or sex workers I wasn't really sure who really like to jump into fountains at uptight society events. So not the best movie on the representation of women front. I will say, though, that I did enjoy it a lot more watching it on my TV rather than my laptop, as I did the first time. But I still don't think it's a good movie. And for overall quality, I'd put it kind of on par with Joker, though they have different strengths and weaknesses. I remember liking the two sequels quite a bit more. I think I'm going to watch those and see how I still feel. But anyway, anything to add, Sean?
Yeah, I just want to say that I know that Thomas Wayne spends his working hours as a doctor to make himself feel better, but doing what could probably only be a public-private partnership to build an entire rail system, and then having your company headquarters be the hub of it, that's like something Trump would do.
Yeah, and if the film had a critique of this would be great, but instead this is the one thing that stopped the economic collapse of Gotham by the ninjas who orchestrate recessions. But anyway, that's it. Other than you guys are right, Batman Returns is the best Batman movie, even though the portrayal of the Penguin is a little anti-Semitic, but that's another rabbit hole. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, go Batman.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole. That was great. Sean, indeed, go Batman. The voice you heard in the background is Sean. Jesus. The voice you heard in the background was Jesus. was Jesus Christ.
He's a huge fan.
Sean Sataro, Nicole's wonderful husband, and has a great podcast that we'll link to in the notes, maybe, if he wants us to.
So I agree with pretty much almost everything
I
Nicole
agree with
said.
pretty much everything Nicole said.
Although I will say that I don't think she gives Bale credit for actually doing
Christian Bale.
In terms of acting. Because I feel like when he's on screen, he's certainly captivating. But as I said to you yesterday as we were watching this film together, I totally did forget how fucking orientalist the first 45 minutes
Talk more
are.
about that.
So again, just kind of as Nicole said, that all of the Asian characters are pretty much just kind of faceless, anonymous people.
Well, they have faces.
I mean, in the sense that they're not fucking characters.
Right, yeah, of course.
And also, well, a lot of them also don't, right?
Yeah,
Because they're like in the ninja garb.
Well, to Nicole's point, I think this movie is, when it comes to the action, and I think I sort of ignored this for a long time, poorly edited. The action in this movie is often incoherent, with the exception, so there's the scene early on where he's in the yard and he's talking to like the when white people have buddies in movies, it's always like an older Asian, like smart Asian guy.
Yeah, I remember that character.
And then there's the guy who comes over and he's like, "You're in hell, little man." Like, that's the only guy who he fights that has any kind of like presence in the scene. I don't find the action in this film to be very well cut, and I think that even hurts that scene because they're not even allowed to register as like punching bags in that first scene, and you don't feel great about the storytelling in those moments.
Yeah, but again, it's as you said, the visuals do not look great. That the only defined characters in those first 45 minutes are these two white dudes. Mm-hmm. And that they are, as she said, they're like, I forget exactly how she put it, but that they're doing kind of like the best, like ninja-ing around.
Yeah.
And that they're the ones that are kind of completely and utterly like in the foreground as characters.
And I think that too, I think Liam Neeson's pretty great in this movie.
He is.
And I think Bale is really good in this movie. But Ken Watanabe plays the kind of decoy
Ra's al
Ghul, and Ken Watanabe is an extraordinary actor,
is, yeah.
And I think that he's wasted. Why can't he be Ra's al Ghul?
Yeah, he gets
like why?
Because
you kind of think he is, and you think that Liam Neeson is kind of a henchman, and it doesn't take anything away. This is a problem that the movie had that this movie has in Dark Knight Rises, which is a movie I don't care for, has where they have to shoehorn in some fan service a little bit, and there's more compelling things going on with other potential things that happen in the movie. Like, it doesn't do anything to have Liam Neeson be Ra's al Ghul.
Oh, I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I mean,
he could have been Ken Watanabe and it would have been great.
Okay, sure. That part I agree with. I thought you meant just kind of like not having the villain.
No, and they need a villain, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the villain is interesting, and at least in this film, he does kind of interesting things. But, I mean, the other thing also Nicole didn't talk about that also is often kind of a really traditional Orientalist trope is that, again, the East is usually represented as this kind of like mystical
place.
Yeah, enigmatic place where
the white guy has to like...
The white guy goes to like rediscover himself.
Last Samurai has this problem
sort of truth
too.
or wisdom about himself. And that's entirely all over this fucking film in the first 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I think... Now, that being said, Nicole made a good point too. It was like she was glad that she's like, I get that people were excited that they had a origin story with some psychological depth, because we had a version of this in Batman, but it's in 1989's Batman, Tim Burton, which creates the idea that the Joker is the person that killed Bruce Wayne's parents, which works really well in that iteration. What I like about this film is how it's kind of you feel as though the violence, or the one thing that this movie does well, whether it does well or it doesn't do well, I think that's really debatable, because I largely agree that the politics of this movie are not great, but the idea of the guy who kills the Wayne family kind of being desperate and like kind of a regular guy who we sort of see but doesn't play into the larger mythology is really, really interesting.
I agree. And
I think that one of the things that this film does really well is, whilst telling the present tense story, flashing back to the things that scare Bruce Wayne, namely bats, and obviously he has trauma from the murder of his parents.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's where I think the film succeeds wonderfully well. Again, is a sense like you're getting an origin story with psychological depth. And I think I also totally agree that the politics of this film are fundamentally reactionary. I mean, that's something we've been talking about for the last 2 months or so. Like,
that's all you talk about.
That's all I talk about. To what degree is this character redeemable, or to what degree can we get an iteration of this character that is in some sort of way progressive, or is in some sort of way, let's say, a betrayal of the reactionary politics that come with any billionaire figure? So far, we have not gotten that.
Let's talk about the.
And we don't.
Let's talk about the dialectic.
Whoa! You gotta get a bell, like ding,
ding. We did it, Dad. Dad, between Bale, like. Let's talk a little bit about the character of Bruce Wayne / Batman and kind of the politics of it. Let's talk a little bit about what the psychological depth is and how that plays with the politics.
Is your mask.
This is a mask.
This is your mask.
I don't want to bury another Batman.
No, it's not about the Katie Holmes thing at the end.
Oh.
She says, this is the mask.
So let's
you're
talk
wearing
about that. Yeah, let's talk. I think the ending of I don't think that so let's start at the end. At the end of the film, Katie Holmes, Rachel Dawes, comes to Bruce Wayne's burned down house. Because Ra's al Ghul burns it down to get revenge, which bullshit, no revenge. She saved your life. And she talks about how she's happy when she found out that Bruce Wayne was back in Gotham after being absent for 7 years, that she thought maybe there was a hope that they could be together. And then she says she found out about his mask. And what she seems to imply, and corrects me if I'm wrong, is that his mask is Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, exactly.
And that he's masking Batman,
right,
or an anger, and until he deals with that, but it feels a little bit like
so the argument
cockamamie. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, first of all, there are parts of the screenplay that are god awful.
Yeah, it is. I agree with Nicole. The dialogue is bad.
There is a lot of terrible.
The dialogue is bad. The movie works. The dialogue is bad.
It works stunningly visually.
Yes.
And when
and when
like Cillian Murphy's on the screen, he's totally
incredible. I actually think Tom Wilkinson is miscast, but great to watch in this movie
as Falcone.
And I think I wish Katie Holmes was given more to do, because I think she's not a terrible actress, and I think. It's just the recasting the recasting was good, but I don't think it completely solved all the problems of the character. Anyway, go. And let's talk about
the character's just kind of flat. At least in this iteration.
What's the inference at the ending there when she's like that?
Oh no, exactly that. Yeah, that Batman is the true version of Bruce Wayne, or the true person there, and then obviously everything that like Bruce Wayne does is a kind of cover up for Batman, which is a kind of like traditional. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before too, in the sense of that so many of the other versions struggle with this duality. I don't know, actually. Now that I think about it, maybe this is the one version that commits to the idea that Batman is the true vision version of the person.
I don't think the other ones do at all. Maybe they do. They flirt with it, but
they're more interested in duality.
And let's talk a little bit about Bale's performance, because I think in this sense he's pretty stunning the way he handles this. Because Bruce Wayne is kind of intentionally flat. He's interesting and dynamic, but one of the things that I think Bale does, I think Bale's the best actor to play the part. Maybe Keaton is amazing, don't get me wrong, but like even if George Clooney grew as an actor, he was pretty bad in Batman and Robin. And Kilmer does the closest thing to what Bale does. But one of the things that I think is interesting is you watch Christian Bale or Bruce Wayne constructing an identity in this movie.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think also in terms of that, the whole Playboy stuff that really gets hyped up here is an obvious kind of, I don't know, it felt really kind of obvious to me.
Tell me more.
Well, just the idea that this is the version also that you get. This is the first version that you get of like Bruce Wayne as this, going back to like the flatness of Bruce Wayne, of like the cliched billionaire playboy who's a womanizer,
bangs women
in pools,
and like they might be sex
hotels,
workers.
They might be sex workers. Who the fuck knows?
And he's performing. It's a performance. He has no interest in doing what he's doing.
Correct. And that's also kind of, that echoes what Katie Holmes says at the end. But it's just kind of boring, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. Is it boring? Why is it boring? Is it boring? Are you bored by watching it? Or
No. I wasn't bored watching this at all. I'm just saying it's kind of an expectation or an easy kind of ploy.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, so would you say that something that maybe these movies deals with is, in this film, he's kind of learning how to be a person again because he's been so wounded by the death of his parents, a little bit. And in the second film, he kind of reclaims a little humanity. But
I don't want to talk about the second film because it's been a very long time since I've seen it.
But he has a choice to make in the second film. And that
at the end.
No, in the middle of the film. Who he chooses to
save.
Which is interesting because Arnold Schwarzenegger does the same, or Mr. Freeze does the same thing to Batman and Robin. He has to either catch Mr. Freeze or...
No, that's the third one, you mean?
No,
the Riddler.
No, Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze does it. It happens in
Oh,
every
the Riddler
movie.
does it too.
But this one really commits. That one commits
God,
to it.
I
And
blocked that one out.
then in Dark Knight Rises, he kind of has become a. Well, Dark Knight Rises has its problems, but he's kind of become this like hobbled old man, and he has to like sort of become Batman again. So it's interesting. I don't know. I just think he has to kind of construct an identity that doesn't really exist in this film. Now,
right. Well, that's what you see him doing from the very beginning in terms
Right.
of the working out
And-
or the practicing the martial arts, whatever the case might be.
Right, and one of the things that's interesting about Christian Bale as an actor is that he's one of those actors who's, which I think this is true of all actors, but Christian Bale is interesting to watch thinking. You can watch him think on screen, you can watch him work things out, and it's really, really compelling. But I think that in some ways, Bruce Wayne is like a weird cipher. Like I think we all accept Batman as the character and whatever it is, and like Bruce Wayne's kind of cool, but Bruce Wayne isn't that cool in this movie. Like he's kind of a shell of a person.
Disagree.
I think he's kind of a.
What do you mean? He's
Well,
not
like
that
as a
cool?
character, he's not. He's like a shell. He's damaged goods, and like he's not. It's
Well,
not like
doesn't that make? I mean, it depends on what you mean by cool. I mean, like cool in the sense like he attempts to be again this like smooth like
Right.
billionaire playboy.
right.
I don't mean cool in the sense of like that is good behavior. I just mean in the sense that
Well, he has a cool life.
yeah, he's a cool life. It exudes confidence.
But he
and-
doesn't. His life looks fucking terrible. Like in the sense that like he's
Why
like
do we talk?
so
did we
we're
watch
talking
the
about the
same film?
So we're talking about two things. We're talking about the superficial way that he lives and the fact that he's a tormented guy.
No,
You know what I mean?
Of course, but that goes with, like with almost like any, let's say, person. Like it's like the people who hype themselves up on social media or
Right.
are constantly
No,
like,
they're
I'm
very
so
they're
happy.
very happy. They're
And you're
very
like-
happy.
And you're like, oh my god, this person is completely and utterly damaged.
Right.
I mean, in that sense,
Yeah.
that we as people know
Right.
that there's a duality to the character.
And what's interesting is that Bale is, I think, able to play both of those things at the same time.
yeah,
But he's also there's
convincing.
also something powerfully blank about him for some of the movie, and he also manages to do better with the screenplay than a lot of other people. Right, I would give him props, him and Gary Oldman, for having the ability to deliver chunks of exposition without you being like, and Morgan Freeman.
and Morgan
without being
Freeman's
like-
great in this. Yeah, it's like this is really trite.
So yeah, I think it's. I mean, I don't know that we've come to a conclusion, but I think that this performance of Bruce Wayne has more levels. He's blank at times. He's angry at times. He's ironic at times. He has a sense of humor. I don't think anything will ever top Keaton in terms of like WTF. Like this is such an interesting performance. Keaton is more Keaton is more interesting than Bale, but Bale is more
Right.
like pro forma,
Yeah, so
which I think is a
right.
good way to think about these films
So
too.
Keaton is more interesting in, as you said, like the dynamic, the weirdness, the tension.
Yes.
Sure, but Bale pulls off the Bruce Wayne stuff more or
Mhm,
better, I should say.
mhm.
And I think you're right, like the performa that it's kind of like
It's like a well-oiled
professional-
machine. It's a professional performance.
He's also the Batman too, the first Batman that we get. That you look at him with his shirt off and like, holy fucking shit! Like that
Yeah.
guy is definitely
Yeah.
Batman.
Keaton-
He's fucking
Keaton
ripped.
looks like he works out once a week.
Exactly, yeah. Keaton has like a good, like a nicely shaped.
He's healthy. He's
Yeah,
healthy.
he's
You
a
never
healthy guy.
barely even see him.
He eats-
he's also like 40 when
he
he
eats a-
played the part.
He eats a
so-
salad every once in a while. He
Yeah.
runs like his 15 miles a week.
Right,
But
exactly.
Bale is in the gym like 8 hours a day.
Well, and clearly he was making the movie. And then one thing that Nicole highlighted, and I think is viciously apparent rewatching this movie is like, oh, your poor billionaire. Like, you know, you feel for. I don't feel bad for this guy. I don't at all.
Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, and maybe I sort of blindly accepted it 15 years ago when the movie came out, but like, it's hard to sympathize with this guy, in some weird way.
As Bruce Wayne or as Batman or as both?
Well, I mean, I don't sympathize with Batman. I mean, I don't think of it like that. I just find it, yeah, like if you really take a step back and think about it, it's a rich guy who's like gone to Asia to become involved with, like literally steal from himself. It's like
Yeah.
it's so
He's like,
like
cosplaying.
It's so like it's
cosplaying
hard.
and being like a badass.
I guess what I'm saying is that it's hard to take it seriously, which makes the movie a lot weaker in my mind. The second film works better because it almost dwells on this a little bit less. And I wish that there was, I know this is not maybe the right place for this, but I wish Nolan there was like a little bit more critique of.
Yeah, but that's not Nolan. We've talked about this before, both like jokingly, mostly jokingly,
more self-aware.
and in passing. But he seems from the films that he's made that he's a rather reactionary guy.
Tell me more about that.
Well, that his politics are just fundamentally reactionary. So even something like Dunkirk, for example.
Which is a great movie.
I think. He's a masterful filmmaker, don't get me wrong. But that he seems to be attracted to so again, like in Dunkirk, this kind of very retrograde, traditional representation of, let's say, of like the British war efforts and of a certain kind of, or certain kinds of like masculinities, like attracted to certain kinds of masculinities.
So what are what would you say he's attracted to about this character?
Batman?
Yeah.
So again, like the billionaire stuff, the kind of flirting with fascism stuff that becomes way more apparent in the second one.
Okay.
And again, presenting that
our episode on Dark Knight's going to be 7 hours long.
Presenting that in a semi-critical manner, but also only having criticism arise only to quickly dismiss it.
For example,
like in the second fucking film, where again
we're talking about the first film.
Okay, in this first one,
yeah.
Or so this one might not even have any critique. What doesn't I don't think have any critique of his class politics. It has some critique of him meting out justice. So the major difference between him and Ra's al Ghul is the fact that he will not kill. So we didn't talk about this scene, but very early on, when he's with the League of Shadows and he's training and he's been like made an honorary member. Right. Somebody's brought out and Ra's al Ghul says like, okay, now for you to officially be one of us, you have to kill this guy because he stole or he did something bad. That's what justice is. And he refuses. And that's when he escapes and he burns down.
Because the man should go on trial.
Yeah, he said like this person should go on trial. And that's also something that you learn that he picked up from Rachel from flashbacks. That basically he was going to kill Chill, the guy who killed his parents. Chill. But Falcone had that guy murdered before Bruce Wayne could kill him. How convenient. So that what he learns is that justice should be putting people on trial. But also you get tons of fucking footage of him just like completely and utterly, obviously in vigilante style. Guys, yeah, just kind of completely, totally like beating the shit out of guys.
Right. And at the end he kills Ducard. He says, I'm not going to kill you, but I won't save you.
But I won't save you.
It's the same.
Which Nicole also pointed out, yeah.
It's a very, okay. So I agree with you there. I also think one thing that this movie, and maybe it's like the sign of the times, to quote Henry Styles, star of Dunkirk. That's a great song.
I thought you were quoting Prince.
Stop your crying, it's a sign of the times.
I prefer Prince.
Yeah, Prince. Well, Prince. Of course, I prefer Prince, but that's the song that came into my mind because we're talking about Dunkirk. But one thing that this movie plays up that I find it super irritating, maybe in the moment when it's entirely possible that Michael Bloomberg is going to be the not going to happen. It's not going to happen, but he's moving up. God, if it happens, oof.
Fuck
but
that guy.
the idea that like the thing that he's besmirching is the Wayne name, like the name of Wayne, like his dad. Like there's a part where he's being criticized as he comes back for the party and he's gone over the rooftop with the Batmobile, which kicks ass in this movie.
It is. It's fucking
that
incredible,
chase sequence rocks. That's a really good sequence. But he comes back and Michael Caine's like, your father, like, and he's kind of like, the only thing that's left of the Wayne name is the name, as if to imply that like Bruce is debasing the name. And it's kind of like, just the movie leans very hard on like the legacy of Thomas Wayne and what he means,
and the patriarchal
and
legacy,
it's like patriarchal legacy, and it's kind of like eye-rollingly annoying because like I like the guy that plays Thomas Wayne in this film. He's incredible in Mandy. If you haven't seen Mandy, he's Linus.
Oh wow, he plays the villain.
He plays the villain in Mandy.
He is amazing, Mandy.
And our friend Peter Rinaldi did an incredible episode with that guy. I should look up his name, Linus something. I feel bad that I don't know, and I like that he's an attempt at making a character of him in this movie, but so much of it is like we're expected to care about the patriarchal relationship of a billionaire to his son. And also Sean's absolutely right. To build a like make an affordable train system
that leads to
your building is like Trump-esque. Bloombergian or Trump-esque for sure.
Like stamping your name on the city.
And it's only like, yes, it's tramp stamping your name.
Tramp stamping your name on the city.
I have a Bruce Wayne tramp stamp on my city. I'm Gotham. And also the fact that he's a doctor during the day is so eye-rollingly like, it's just a stone's throw away from like he's just like a megalomaniac that controls the city. I don't know. It's just very
or tries to control the
tries
city.
to control the city, and it's a little blah at a certain point.
Well, that's the thing. There's different ways to control the city. If you do it
Right.
and you wear like a scarecrow mask, you're a bad guy. If you do it through your billions, you're a good guy.
Right, exactly.
Going back to the Batmobile too, which I totally forgot about, that this film also has this really interesting. So Bruce Wayne gone from the company for like 7 years. And when he comes back, he finds out that the company's been investing in like military equipment.
Yeah, so the guy who runs
weaponry.
it has kind of like moved into like arms, essentially,
So
which is, it's interesting that they make the point to be like, this isn't what they did before.
Right. But it's also, again, interesting to think about like critique where like Bruce Wayne would be like, oh, this isn't cool. We shouldn't be doing this. But he uses some of that weaponry like in the Batmobile.
Yeah, I mean, his outfit is a soldier.
And he like appropriates it or reappropriates it and turns it into something like good. Whereas obviously the real actual critique of that would be like, no, none of this is good.
Right.
Like military hardware, regardless of what you do with it, is bad.
Yeah, there's something distinctly sort of militarized about this take on Batman. And I honestly think part of it's because they were like, this is cool. Also, I think that... Go ahead.
No, yeah, that's exactly it. Like, it's cool to watch this fucking like tank roll through the streets and blow shit up.
Talk about to play the devil's advocate here a little bit, just for the sake of the film.
Al Pacino was in that
good
one
people
too,
on both sides, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Played the devil. It was me. Picture it, me and Keanu Reeves, and I was the devil.
God, you do one voice really well, and then you lean on it as hard as you can. One of the things that's great about this movie, and you said this last night, was like the attempt at verisimilitude.
Yes.
And it is very realistic. I say that with air quotes. And one of the things that makes it realistic is that he's like, hey, why don't I just use the stuff from Wayne Industries? So like, I appreciate that. One thing that, whether you can, I mean, and again, like, I think that there's a really fair criticism. Sean Mann and I were texting about how it's inherently absurd. Like, that anyone would ever make a superhero movie. Fine. That's realistic. It's more absurd than like having Arnold Schwarzenegger do like poems. What if Mr. Freeze was a poet? No, then have him do
Arnold
puns.
Does poems.
Have him do puns about like this or that. But it is, if they're going to go for verisimilitude and making it realistic, him like borrowing hardware from the company or doing these things or finding the vehicle works really, really well. And that's the thing, is that, and I want to talk about what's good about this film. In spite of all of that, this movie kicks ass in so many ways.
Yeah.
The politics are bad, sure, but the movie kicks ass.
Well, again, its commitment to a certain kind of worldview, and as you said earlier, kind of its commitment to a certain kind of view of Gotham, is really impressive, and it's so immersive, and it really sucks you in. And again, talking about like verisimilitude, if a character like this existed, his hardware would be military grade. Right. That's what he would be using, and he does. And I'm not saying obviously the politics of that are good. I'm just saying like it's such a convincing portrayal of what that figure would look like and be like, that I'm like, this is so fucking entertaining.
Now, could the movie lean into its critique a lot more? Sure. Like, I mean, could it like, you know, one thing that is interesting is that we're largely seeing through the film through the eyes of a billionaire. So like, there's really no consequence for him. Like when he goes into Carmine Falcone's restaurant, Carmine Falcone's not going to gun him down, even though that's kind of what the scene is about. Is Carmine Falcone being like, I can do whatever I want.
And he says that, yeah.
But he's not going to kill Bruce Wayne. You know, like, so there's no real threat to Bruce Wayne in any conventional sense in how I would think about it. But I do think that like, it's hard. It's okay. So maybe when the film came out and I was 23, 22, I was very excited about this movie. I mean, Batman is a huge part, but like now watching it in 2000, and I think in 2005, we're 4 years away from 9/11, which, you know, so this kind of like gritty, realistic take was like much appreciated, because I don't think you're getting away with like, maybe they should have been making the Arnold Schwarzenegger pun to Batman's then, but you're not getting away with it in the same way. But 15 years on, it just doesn't, it's still a great movie, but I don't have the same level of kind of empathy or feeling for Bruce Wayne as I did maybe in 2005.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair.
It's a lot less believable and empathetic and sympathetic.
It would be interesting. I mean, that's a good point too, to think about, let's say, how the last 15 years has changed our, as Nicole says, right? He's a 1%er, and obviously that particular term didn't really exist in nomenclature as it does now after Occupy.
Well, and there's a reading.
And to think about, the third film also too is how reactionary it is. in relationship to Occupy.
Yeah, you can argue it's an anti-Occupy movie.
Without question.
Right. Yeah.
There's another reactionary Nolanism.
Yeah, is that I mean, I haven't watched Dark Knight Rises in a long time, but I remember I've had conversations with people who think it's both anti-Occupy but also anti-cop, because the only cop in the Batman movies that is an incompetent piece of shit is Gordon. And also I think it's worth talking a little bit about the Gordon character in the Nolan parlance, so to speak, because he is a good cop. He's not on the take.
He's competent.
And he's competent. He's empathetic. He's caring. That relationship does it for me. It really works. The relationship, when you see him in Dark Knight Rises, the Dark Knight Rises, there's a flashback to him putting his jacket on Bruce Wayne in this film, and I think it actually, I remember it hitting me hard in the movie theater. Most of that movie I was like, but that hit me pretty hard. But one thing that's interesting is that there's also a moment in this film where, despite his kind of like good intentions or whatever, he very clearly says like, I'm no rat. So he's not actually interested in reforming the police in any way, like on the ground, but like when he becomes commissioner, maybe things become better than they were. I don't know, but he's just such like an interesting character, because sort of similarly that in the way that he's kind of a good cop, the film doesn't really put him in a position of being like anti-cops in any way, shape, or form.
I would also like to point out that Al Pacino, played a good cop.
Did you just listen to a word that I said, or are you just...
Liam, I'm a guest on your show. Please give me the respect I deserve. That I played a good cop in Michael Mann's Heat, which you may have seen and heard about. All right, Al, we fucking get it.
Okay, Al, come on.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. I don't know why.
I'm sorry I invited him.
It's fine.
I promise.
It's weird. He's been watching The Irishman in the living room all morning. But no, I think it's another example of a kind of like great a character full of verisimilitude, even if it's that also is kind of existing within a... We're spending a lot of time critiquing the politics of this movie, which we do all the time, but it's so goddamn believable.
No, we talked about how entertaining it is. Yeah.
And it's also very believable.
This is also
the world that it sets up.
This is also the Jim Gordon that you get from Batman Year One.
Yes.
And it's interesting to think,
which is a great comic,
again, about him in relationship to, or like it's an origin story for both of them.
Right.
And obviously you get more of his origin story in the comic than you do in this.
Mm-hmm.
But this clearly borrowed that kind of Jim Gordon, because the Jim Gordon from the first 4 Batman movies that we discussed is a complete another character, like a cartoon.
He's much better in Batman 1989, and he's pretty good in Batman Returns. As
he's
the
a
movies
cartoon.
progress, but then he's the movies too. The movies do that as well. Let's talk a little bit about Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow
and how awesome he is.
God, it's a good performance, and it's the only kind of comic booky performance in the whole movie. I feel like Nolan either didn't know what to do with this guy, which I think Nolan knows exactly what he's doing most of the time, for good or for better. But Cillian Murphy's performance in this film is just like the perfect amount of insane. I think it's a great origin story for this character. And I really like that the film takes the time to turn him into like, he's a doctor. He has Arkham Asylum. He also works for Falcone. He's on the take, and kind of the interpolitics of like him having to deal with Rachel Dawes' office. I really appreciate that the movie kind of like attempts a take at like looking at actual politics and the gangland kind of stuff that goes on in this movie. The gangland
stuff, is interesting. And it's interesting also because if Batman were to be a hero or like an actual thing, he would, I guess, run up against like crime bosses first and foremost before like these super villains.
And that's something that Phantasm does really well, is that I appreciate that Nolan took the time, at least in the first 2 Batman films, and I suppose a little bit in the third, there's like corrupt businessmen, like that the film is a little, I said it doesn't really look at structural kind of problems, but it does. It looks at like corruption within the police. It looks at corruption within like sort of the DA's office, corruption within these kind of like administrative things. In the second film, the mob's influence on the police, how they're able to get information about people by like the right price. Joker's able to infiltrate, kind of get that kind of thing. And then in the third film, there's like a literal kangaroo court. Like the film, I guess, gestures at this stuff, but does it?
Well, there's no implicit critique, or there's no implicit deep dive into these structural forces. Yeah, so you get obviously,
but they're there.
Well,
which is
yeah,
not
but
enough. I'm
in a,
saying,
in a very, very general way. But going back to Murphy also, and about how the character obviously becomes like the living embodiment of
Scarecrow.
the Bruce Wayne's fear and trauma. And I think that's what's really fascinating about this film. Also, that it leans into the trauma and the fear.
So you think the trauma and the fear is the best part of the film?
Yeah, in terms of the psychological death, because you don't get that, I think, in the same way in the other films that you do here. Like, it's interesting to think about how this character basically develops this persona to cover up his fear, and
Right.
and not because of like he's a badass or because of like just his general trauma, this
Right.
general anger, but that it comes from this place of like vulnerability rather than anything else.
Yeah, I think that works really well. I think the character arc is pretty good for Bruce Wayne, in that he's sort of forced to cope with his trauma, engage in the real world, and also like learn a kind of lesson about like and vigilantism is a big part of this film, obviously, as it does. And I think this film leans in on it really hard when Michael Caine talks about like the sense that it's like you can't make it personal. Like these things are a big part of what the film is. I think the second film does much more with it, but I like where it's what direction it's starting to lean in towards.
Yeah, I'd have to think a little bit more about that. Because I don't know, again, if the arc is... I don't know if it really does it for me.
Okay, tell me more.
I mean, I just don't think it gets us to a point of resolution, or where it gets us to...
Well, sure, it's a setup for a...
It's a setup for... No, but I mean resolution in the sense of like even thinking about, let's say, it ends at a place, obviously, where the character is... I don't know.
Well,
I mean, maybe you are supposed to also, like, one way to kind of read the ending in a kind of reparative way, and reparative I simply mean in the sense of like a better reading of it, more interesting reading of it, is that, again, he's really still fundamentally damaged.
Well, of course, he's still Batman.
And yeah, exactly. And that without, let's say, any point at which he can get rid of that, he will always be damaged. So it's interesting maybe to think about the ending of the trilogy as this kind of rejection of, let's say...
His damage. And okay, so I think that's interesting. I guess we'll get there. One thing I want to talk about that this film does, like, beautifully.
Ooh, the chef's
and you
kiss.
had to wonder how much they were... I doubt it, but I wonder if the final scene of the film, when the Joker card is revealed, was there in the original. Or if they...
The original cut.
Yeah, or if Warner Brothers was, like, so happy with how the film looks that they were like, we got to do this next. Because... And it's probably not, because that scene does such an amazing job of setting up some of the... that scene does such a good job, I think, of setting up some of the conflict in the second film, which is the escalation, which is the Joker being like, there's no me without Batman. I'm here in response to Batman. Like, if there's going to be a guy who operates outside the bounds of law...
Zoom in another one.
Then there's going to be a guy doing... And, like, it's kind of amazing how clearly thought out that seemed to be at the end of this movie.
But is that what that scene is? Like, what it...
Well,
what's in
because
that
he's
scene
like,
that
we have
makes
to
that
we have to
clear?
talk about escalation. He's like... When
Is that what
escalation,
he
he says,
says?
yeah, and he's like, you're, if they bring semi-automatics, we have to bring automatics. Like, and then he says, and you're wearing a mask. Like, you have a taste for theatrical.
Oh.
Take this guy, and he shows him the Joker
I
card.
totally forgot about that exchange.
Well,
or
it's
that
just,
particular
yeah, it's just
dynamic of
very, it's clear that that's like already leaning towards the Joker being in response to Batman. One thing that I thought was really interesting that you would not have seen in the film, it doesn't show, but the fact that all the people escape Arkham at the end of the end of the film, and the Joker's got to be one of them. And I always think that's really interesting, the idea that Joker's one of the guys that Batman frees, or that is freed as a result of this action.
I do like what they did with Arkham here.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's like one of those moments where you said there were like it gestures to this much larger world, and it doesn't spend a lot of time dealing with it, because obviously that's not what it's concerned with. But that there is, again, this kind of taste of this much larger structural apparatus that's operating.
And it
the
gets
destruction
into
of
the other
it.
films.
Yeah, and the destruction of it, obviously, at the end of this film, as you said, kind of leads directly into the second one. See, like, I think like that, for example, is like how good this film is at like meticulously crafting this world without, let's say, making it too heavy-handed, even though, again, some of the dialogue is terrible.
Dialogue is terrible. But no, it isn't. I don't think it's too heavy-handed.
Yeah, and I think those are like the touches where I'm like, this world is really well crafted. You kind of know what it is already. You kind of have the contours of it.
Yeah.
And it just drops you in, and it has you, like, if you were, let's say, a Batman fan, you'd be able to like quickly figure out like, okay, I get it. Arkham Asylum, that's where all the crazies go. That's where all the bad guys go.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I think it's just also worth noting that he's using... I think the focus was on like, let's make a film about like a police film about a city that just so happens to involve Batman. And I think the best compliments this movie gets paid is like, it's a movie about like a city battling its own corruption and Batman as a character in it. Like, it's larger. It operates on a larger canvas. One final thing, because I know we got to wrap up because George has got to get on a plane. The hallucinations that people have as a result of Scarecrow are fucking terrifying.
They are terrifying.
They're so well done.
The Batman,
It's one of
when he gives Scarecrow his own medicine.
And he's got like the scary face. Oh, it's so scary. Well, this was great.
Well done.
Nicole, Sean, thank you so much for your feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
The movie does kind of suck, but
politically speaking,
it's pretty awesome also.
It kind of reminds me of what Marx, or was it Engels?
Oh my God.
How Marx and Engels preferred, maybe I've said this before.
Preferred Dark Knight to Dark Knight Rises?
No, the reactionary Balzac rather than the progressive Balzac, rather than the progressive Zola, because in Balzac's reactionary novels, one gets more of the contradictions of capitalism, more of the antagonisms that are found within the capitalist system, and that he illustrates those contradictions better, just better than, let's say, the progressive Zola. So, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, in a reactionary film like this, the contradictions are heightened or they become more obvious. Oh, Liam's falling asleep. Okay, maybe we should just go.
What'd you say?
It's me again, the great Al
Oh my
Pacino.
God, Al, I'm so
George, shut the fuck up.
I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
I'm Al Pacino. Wait, no, fuck. This was
Oeuvre Busters.